until Essen. There's going to be a lot of reviews coming this week. I'll be doing a live Q&A at some point over the course of the week, so keep an eye out for that. I'm not sure when. Our top 100 is going to continue. Also, the cruise. We're going to be doing a live Q&A for the cruise at some point this week, but I'll tell you what, we're going to be shutting down registration in a week and a half or so. So if you're on the fence about it, now's the time to come. So anyway, let's go on and check out the news. All right, folks, after the flurry of news last week, there's a little bit less this week, but some big news nonetheless. Ravensburger has bought Think Fun Games. Now, Think Fun Games is the company that makes, the Rush Hour, and I've been reviewing a lot of their stuff. Those puzzles are really great things. Ravensburger, of course, is one of the biggest board game companies in the world, so them buying at Think Fun is an interesting idea, but also makes sense. Z-Man Games is coming out with My First Stone Age card game. They already came out with My First Stone Age, which was a children's version of Stone Age, which I think is not that easy to find at this point in time, but this is going to be the card game. So this is the first time I think there's ever been a card game, kids game, of a board game, card game. Okay. Marvel Legendary is having a new set come out, Spider-Man Homecoming. This is the first time that they have made it based in the Marvel Comics universe. So this is going to, instead of having drawn artwork, is going to have stills from the movie in it. And I think they're going to planning to make a big set based in the Marvel Comics universe in the future. This is interesting to me. I'm okay with it. They look fine. I just don't think they're going to mix very well with the Marvel Legendary drawn artwork set. So maybe if I get these, I'll keep them separate. Who knows? Let's see. Indian Summer. This is a game coming from Stronghold Games. It's the second part of Uwe Rosenberg's puzzle trilogy. The first one was Cottage Garden, which is a great tile-laying game. But this one here is geared towards experienced players, says the description. There's tiles with holes that are put on forest boards that cover up treasures. When you get these, I don't know, you got to cover your forest floor. It's like a tongue twister with leaves. All right, and finally, and sad news, I guess, Toys R Us has declared bankruptcy. Now, whatever you might think of Toys R Us, their game selection is not necessarily the best in the world. This is still not a good thing for the hobby. Toys R Us has, over the last few years, has been carrying better and better games. So we'll see what happens with them and see if this keeps them in business for a while. Time will tell. All right, let's go to Kickstarter news.
Happy breakfast, everybody. Today's projects have us evolving, looking at the stars, and telling a news story about it. So let's take a look at what's happening in our crowdfunding world today. From the talented publishing shop Foxtrot Games, who've brought us hits like Lanterns and World's Fair 1893, comes Spy Club. This is a cooperative game in which players are kids in an investigative club who work together to solve neighborhood mysteries. Spy Club is actually a campaign and almost legacy-style game in that there are 5 core games that can link together to form a larger narrative. As you play, more cards are unlocked that impact later games. But the game is also designed to be resettable at will just by resorting the cards. Players will flip, draw, and trade double-sided clue cards, and if you can confirm 5 clues of the same type, you solve part of the case. As you get more clues, the story emerges, and you have to find the solution before the culprit escapes or you run out of clues. Each campaign is designed to be replayable based on the variables within the game, and Spy Club features a delightfully diverse cast of characters and great art overall, and you can get a copy of Spy Club for a pledge of $39. Gridstones is an abstract game based on constellations. The Kickstarter is actually the 10th anniversary edition that includes updated art. Game mechanisms are simple. Each turn you either add or remove a stone from the board, trying to create the pattern that matches your constellation cards. The game can be played out as strategically or casually as players enjoy. The game includes synthetic star sapphire stones and newly added shooting star cards that give a 1 use per game special ability. A copy of Gridstones that plays 2 to 6 players takes a pledge of just $19 Canadian plus shipping. Stellar Leap is a streamlined 4X game with all the X's: explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate. Dice determine your access to resources, but there's dice mitigation with universal and alien powers. Planets generate resources based on the die roll, which in turn are used to grow your population, explore the galaxy, or complete missions. Stellar Leap has direct conflict because you could attack opponents to take control of planets, and events can have both positive and negative effects. And after 6 events are triggered, the game ends. Stellar Leap looks like a nice entry-level 4X experience with an optional expansion that increases game variability with new planets, events, traits, and bonus cards. You can get a copy of Stellar Leap for $39 plus shipping for the base game, or for $49 you can get the base game and the Frontiers expansion. From the publisher of Sagrada comes a party game about the daily news. In News at 11, players fill out cue cards that are the topics that have to be worked into the broadcast. Players take turns being the broadcaster for a specific news segment like weather or traffic, and they must use all of their cue cards during the story. Stories expand and twist as more cue cards are added for the afternoon and evening news. And the game accommodates players who aren't quite into the social storytelling by having a producer role, which can impact the game timing and more. A copy of News at 11 takes a pledge of just $19 plus shipping. And last but not least, North Star Games is bringing their hit game Evolution to the digital realm. I've had beta access and experienced this full-feature app firsthand. There's an interactive tutorial that will teach you the game, the UI is intuitive, there are multiple AIs, and there will be online cross-platform play. On top of that, the app will feature a campaign with a variety of solo challenges. The Evolution app works to bring the game to life with a high degree of polish. The lovely watercolor art of the board game has been enhanced with animations, and the overall experience is immersive, quick, and engaging. Pledges at the $10 level or more will get the Climate expansion and promo content for free, and an extra copy of the app. But you can get beta access and a single platform app for a pledge of just $4. Okay, that's all I've got for you this episode. Hopefully something caught your eye. And until next time, I hope you have a wonderful week.
Hello there, Chaz Marler from Pair of Dice Paradise here, and last week, you may recall, in this very spot, I premiered a brand new series called Board Games Throughout History, which talked all about the board game that was recently discovered in an ancient Viking burial site, and then speculated on whether or not that game could have been Tafel, which dates back to the mid-10th century. Well, in response to that segment, 2 viewers responded to that series with examples of other ancient board games that still get some play today. So, instead of producing my previously planned segment for today, where I was going to give away this $1,000 board game gift certificate, instead, I'm going to continue this impromptu series for at least one more episode, with a look this time at an ancient and deceptively challenging game.
Andre de Luzon, your sword.
Hello, and welcome to episode 1 of Scenery with Sarastro. In this episode, I'll be creating pine trees on some rural bases, which I'm making primarily for use with the Star Wars Legion miniatures game. but they could of course be used as scenery in a range of sci-fi or fantasy themed settings. It's worth mentioning that because I may ultimately be creating scenery for a range of environments, including snow and desert, and my space is limited, I will be using the amazing terrain mats by Deep Cut Studios for each environment type. You can find links to these mats as well as a full product list in the video description below. To make the trees, I'll be using quite a well-established method that often uses furnace filter, but I'm using a technique from an excellent guide by Luke Towan, which uses the much cheaper coconut fibre instead. You can find a link to Luke's video in the video description, which I highly recommend watching, although I will be summarising the process here. In the second part of the video, I'll be sharing my approach to creating the scenic bases for the trees, using polystyrene foam, some optional sculptor mould, and some basing materials. Let's begin. We're going to build the trees using some coconut fibre, balsa wood dowel, and some skewers. We begin by taking some coconut fibre, which is what's used for lining hanging baskets, and cutting it into roughly octagonal or circular discs, ranging in size between 1/2 inch to 2 inches in diameter. We then peel each disc in half and stretch the fibre out to create a thinner, more roughly edged shape. Getting the kids involved can help speed things along. I'm then going to spray the skewer with some glue before sliding the fibre discs on. I'm pushing the Getting the kids involved can help speed things along. I'm then going to spray the skewer with some glue before sliding the fibre discs on. I'm pushing the first disc down to somewhere between 30 to 50% of the length of the skewer, and I'm using smaller pieces the further up we go.
This battle shall be your last.
For the very top, I might stick down a few loose pieces of the fibre. We should aim to create some variety in the size and shape of the trees as we do this. Next we need to spray the branches with a mid to dark brown, and I'm using Citadel's Mournfang brown for this. I found that punching some holes in a cardboard box provides a useful way to store the trees in between stages. I'm now going to apply some texture by spraying the trees with some glue and providing a liberal application of conifer coloured coarse turf, followed with a sprinkling of the lighter weeds coloured fine turf by Woodland Scenics. Here I'm spraying on the glue, and now I'm applying the coarse turf. After another spray of glue, we can apply the fine turf from a more elevated angle to create a highlight effect, although this could be considered optional if you're on a budget. I found that producing a batch of around 20 trees was quite an economical way to work. For the trunks of the trees, I'm using balsa wood dowels measuring 9 and 12 mm in diameter, which I'm cutting into individual lengths of between 9 to 22 cm. These aren't strict measurements, but I wouldn't go much narrower for the trunks. I'm then tapering each trunk down with a craft knife, and I'm creating some bark-like texture with a wire brush. I'm then going to bore a 1 cm hole into the narrow end of each trunk, and insert a fresh skewer, which I'll be using to hold the trunk during the painting stage. I'm also going to cut a piece of wire or paperclip and insert it into the base of the trunk. We can now paint the trunk, and I've chosen to use Scale Colours Inktense wood ink, which I'm thinning with an equal amount of water. This is just one option among many, and you could of course paint the trunks however you like. I've chosen to use this particular ink because of the deep reddish-brown tone it produces. Once dry, we can clip the unwanted skewer from the tree, leaving around 1 cm free, before gluing the tree to the trunk with some glue and a pair of pliers. As a final optional touch, you may wish to chop up some small twigs or branches, which we can attach to the tree by drilling or boring a small hole and gluing them into place, either with some superglue or PVA glue. You can add as few or as many as you like. With the trees complete, let's now take a look at how I've chosen to create the bases. I'm using some 25mm polystyrene foam, and I'm marking out the rough shape I want my bases to be. I'm then using a hot wire cutter to cut round the shape. This could also be done with a serrated blade. Because I want this base to be more flat, I'm going to cut it into 2 halves. I'm then going to use the hot wire cutter to create a more gently sloping edge. This is to give the bases a more seamless appearance, and to make it easier to stand the miniatures on if necessary. Once we're happy with the shape, I like to drill some fine holes where I want my trees to be, and then use a hot glue gun to fix them into place. I'm creating clusters mostly of 2, 3 or 4 trees, with 1 or 2 larger bases for the sake of variety. At this stage, you could create whatever kind of landforms you like. Here I'm creating a larger mound, which I'm building up in a couple of layers. I'm then gluing on some actual rocks which I picked up outside, because I like the natural texture and colours they provide. Although you could of course simply carve your own out of the polystyrene foam.
Upon you. What is this? Even when your own doubts and fears are made manifest, you will not yield. Fall into
And I'm now gluing on the tree. At this point, there's a range of things you could apply to the base to create some texture. It could be some kind of basing paste, or some PVA mixed with sand, or perhaps some polyfiller or spackling paste. I'm going to use Sculptor Mold, which is an easy to use modelling compound. Before I do, I'm going to cover the table with some cling film to avoid making a mess and to prevent the Sculptor Mold from sticking to the surface. I'm now going to tip some of the Sculptor Mold into a container, which you can see has quite a fluffy, powdery texture. We then simply mix in some water until we have something that looks like thick porridge. We then use this to cover the base. I'm using my fingers to help smooth down the edges to create a more tapered edge. After around 10 minutes or so, as the paste begins to set, it becomes a little easier to smooth down. It's important to keep the bases still whilst working on them, to avoid tearing the tapered edges where the Sculptor Mold joins the table. It's likely that some of the Sculptor Mold will get onto the trees, but we can paint over that later on. Once done, it can take around 24 hours to completely dry, after which we can peel the bases off the cling film, and they're now ready for painting. In choosing colours for the bases, my aim is to try to match the surface I'll be playing on, which in my case is the Muddy Field Terrain Mat by Deep Cut Studio. I bought the 6' by 3 mat in the mousepad material, and is the perfect solution if you lack the space for fully sculpted terrain. I also think the detail and richness of the print is very impressive and has quite a deceptive 3D-like quality. I'm beginning by applying a coat of Vallejo's Leather Brown Surface Primer with an airbrush, but will first add a few drops of airbrush thinner to help prevent blockages. I'm then backing up the air to mix the thinner with the paint. You should of course select whatever colours you like, and you don't have to use an airbrush as I'm doing. Once that's completely covered, I'm going to apply Vallejo's Dark Green. This is going to cover most of the base, but I don't mind if some of the brown shows through. We can also spray over any patches of white on the trunks, which we can then reapply some ink to later on, although a little green can give a subtle mossy appearance. Finally, I'm going to apply some camouflage green, and I'm aiming for more patchy coverage to introduce some variation. These layers of colour, however, aren't vital, since we'll be applying some turf to the base in a moment, so you could get away with simply painting a single flat colour if you wish. I'm now going to apply a range of basing materials to introduce some texture and colour variation. I'll be using 3 different tones of grassy turf by Jarvis, as well as some black and brown grit by Army Painter. First we cover the base with some slightly thinned PVA glue, making sure that we get right to the edges. I'm then taking my mid-tone turf and I'm applying a thin layer covering the majority of the base, but leaving some areas thinner than others. I'm then applying some of the dark green, but more sparingly, to certain areas to create some variation. And now I'm providing just a hint of the light green turf.
Destruction is at my command.
Next I'm providing some far more localized patches of the black battleground.
Your reality is sundered.
And finally, just a very light sprinkling of the brown battleground. The overall aim here is to achieve a nice balance between subtle variation with organic unity.
Consume them all.
For larger pieces of terrain, such as we can see here, it's a good idea to break things up into individual areas. When applying the turf, just be sure to leave a border of clear PVA, so we can more easily continue the process without getting our brush into the turf which we've already laid down.
Consume them all. Mortals. Your fate was sealed the moment you stepped into the nether.
I'm also going to paint some of the rocks that got hit with the airbrush earlier, preserving some of the natural colours and textures where possible. If you're interested in the colours I'm using, you can find a list of paints used in the video description. I'm mostly wet blending these colours on to achieve some quick and easy gradients. We can also reapply the ink wash to the trunks where necessary. To finish the bases off, we can now stick down a range of twigs, foliage or general forest litter. I'm keeping these elements mostly quite flat to allow the miniatures to still stand on the terrain. Coarse turf can be added to create some more bushy textures or mossy effects. This log is simply a stick I found on the floor of the local forest, which I've painted with the same ink wash I used for the trees. Here I'm drilling a small hole in which I'm going to be fixing a piece of fine leaf foliage by Woodland Scenics. And finally, I'm gluing down some twisted twigs near 1 or 2 trees to look like roots. I'm then securing them with some basing paste. Which we can then obscure with some fine turf. And this completes our pine trees with scenic bases. Thank you for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Although I created around 40 trees to create the scenes you can see here, I think that 20 would be a fine starting place, especially if you plan to add other scenic elements in the future, such as giant redwoods, buildings or vehicles. This could be achieved over 2 to 3 days, and should produce a great start to any scenery collection. My special thanks as always go to the kind patrons who are funding this work. I'll be creating some more scenery over the coming months, so do be sure to subscribe and join me again soon. Happy painting!
have an alarm clock, and her name is Lucky. There's
Here I'm blending this back into the more shadowed area.
You shall be purged from this world.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Game Nexus. It's Dwayne here, and today we're going to be talking about something that just popped up on the radar from Fantasy Flight Games at this year's Gen Con, and it's a little game called Star Wars Legion, and it kind of dropped like a big megaton nuke on the gaming industry, and you know, sent shockwaves throughout all the different communities and such. And I guess the biggest reason why that is that Fantasy Flight has been steadily pushing hard on their Star Wars license for the past few years. They've got Star Wars X-Wing, Armada, they've got Imperial Assault, and the new Star Wars Destiny. And essentially what they've been doing is they've been sort of moving across different genres, checking off the checkbox on the various types of games that exist in the marketplace. Now, up until recently, they haven't really put their foot in any kind of a large-scale infantry-style war game. I mean, Imperial Assault was the closest that we got as far as that experience goes, but you know, a lot of these die-hard Warhammer players are always sort of at the top of their mind thinking, well, you know, why do we not have a game like Warhammer with the Star Wars license? Now, there's probably some politics behind it, and there's probably lots of issues when it comes to why that wasn't happening. The biggest one was the fact that Games Workshop and Fantasy Flight did have a working relationship. This was, you know, to bring this the Warhammer universe to players through things like the role-playing game and collectible games that Fantasy Flight would produce, and taking that off of the plate of Games Workshop. Now, one of those caveats, my guess is that they weren't able to move ahead with a competing product to Warhammer, so our hopes of seeing a Star Wars 40K style game was probably not going to happen until the relationship dissolved with the agreement. Now, that actually has happened. So what we're seeing now in 2017 is you're starting to see a game like Rune Wars, which is a fantasy-based large-scale combat game, much in the same vein as Warhammer Fantasy was from Games Workshop. And now, this year at Gen Con, we see Star Wars Legion. So what do we know about Star Wars Legion? Well, outside of, you know, obviously the standard marketing materials that Fantasy Flight has shown us, there were several demos being played at this year's Gen Con. Obviously, you know, the product that they have to show us right now is the core box set, you know, which is basically a small force of Imperials, a small force of Rebels led by a commander on each side with Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader. You know, the figures themselves, there's been some size comparisons, look like we're going to be a little bit bigger than Imperial Assault. Interesting to note that they are on very Warhammer-esque bases, right down to the sort of the elevated size of the actual base, as opposed to Imperial Assault's very thin diameter bases. But you know, for what we've seen, it looks like this is going to be a Galactic Civil War based era game, so much like Imperial Assault, where they haven't delved into the prequels or even the new movies. We're going to have this one rooted firmly in the original trilogy. You know, one side of me is a kind of a missed opportunity thought. I mean, the bulk of ground warfare, as we've seen, it took place during the Clone War era. So if you're looking at, you know, possibly some of the best figures you could get a hold of, would definitely be that era between, you know, dropships and all sorts of great machines of war. Now, this could be just the first wave of an ongoing product lineup. You know, and to that point, I'm hoping that come launch in early 2018, we actually do have more than just this box set. Something that's happening with Rune Wars right now is that they have launched the Rune Wars miniature game, which is the same idea of a large-scale game, but they've launched it with 2 factions and a very limited miniature line. So what's happened now is the players are actually waiting for more product, as opposed to rushing out to store, having a ton of product on the shelf to be able to pick and choose from. This is an important thing, because if you look at what I perceive to be its main competitor, which would be Warhammer, Games Workshop has decades of product on the shelf to pull from. They have very in-depth and expanded product lines for each of their factions. So, as far as capturing the money from a prospective player, the players are at the mercy of GW at this point. They've got lots to spend their money on. When we get to launch at 2018 for this product, I really am hoping that we get more than just a core box set. I hope we do see some product to pull from. Otherwise, you might see a situation where people invest in the game, but very quickly outpace what's available, and then you may end up getting players who are maybe not as excited as they could be because they don't have new product to buy. So that's going to be something to keep an eye on as well, to see if that actually changes during launch. Now, another thing I'm hearing online, as well as I think what we're seeing is trying to pull people's mindset. I mean, if you weren't a Warhammer player and say you just purchased Fantasy Flight Games product, you've been kind of spoiled in the sense that X-Wing comes with fully painted figures. X-Wing also has a lack of scenery required to play the game. Imperial Assault, while not fully painted figures, were pre-assembled, just needing paint. Or some people chose not to paint them, period. But again, you also had a playmat in the form of tiles that are colored and have art on it. So you didn't really, have any kind of setup barriers. You just sort of pulled the box out, put the tiles out, and played. And thus, with a lot of the Final Fantasy Flight Games product. This is interesting because some of the other chatter we're seeing as well is players who are a little bit upset by the fact that they need to assemble the figures, and even further to that this terrain, like I'm seeing lots of chatter on the fact that this terrain needs to be purchased, or you need to be able to buy this terrain, or it better come with terrain. And that, to me, that sort of paints the picture that maybe some of the people who are used to playing these games don't come from the Warhammer family, where they're used to building terrain. Me as a hobby gamer, ever since I've been in this hobby, that's been the other part to the gameplay side of it, part of the thing that I enjoy. But again, knowing how to build terrain, where to find terrain, and just the fun of actually building a battle mat or a battle table, a game table. So it's just some of the things. It's interesting to see that people are actually bringing these up as negative points to the game, whereas your standard war gamer is quite used to having to do all this anyway. So that'll also be something to keep an eye on. But interesting, we also have a lot of discontent within the community on this now. We have a lot of people who have really been heavily invested in Imperial Assault, and to them, this announcement comes as sort of possibly a death knell for that game. A lot of people are talking, the chatter online is that, this kind of kills Imperial Assault, and some players are saying, they're not going to get Legion because they spent all this money on Imperial Assault, and vice versa. It's quite an interesting thing that we have going within the gaming communities. So, taking a step back, I've played Imperial Assault for about a year and a half now, so I'm relatively new to that game. But I'm not new to the world of board gaming. So in particular, I have an opinion on the matter, and I think a lot of people are thinking that there needs to be a choice between the two games. They think that with the announcement of Legion being sort of a similar product in the sense that it uses a similar scale figure, is now going to compete with Imperial Assault and perhaps even kill it. In my opinion, not so much. I kind of think that both products will exist and will cater to different player bases. You're looking at Imperial Assault as a board game-esque with campaign component to it, much in the same concept as Descent is. And I believe that product will continue to sell, and you'll still find people who like that style of gaming with it, as the skirmish, small teams, up close and personal. Looking at Legion from what we've seen so far, we're seeing, Galactic Civil War era figures. We're talking Stormtroopers, AT-ATs, Rebellion troops. Hopefully more. We haven't really seen what the product lineup's going to be, outside of the core box set that they've shown us. We can only assume that we're going to be delving into things like land speeders, air speeders possibly. I don't know if they'll go too far into the realm of starfighters, because we obviously have X-Wing, and it'll be just a different product line. But sure hope that we see AT-ATs. We're going to see lots of machines of war from the Rebels and Imperials. And yes, we're probably going to see recasts of existing figures that they're obviously going to pull from the Imperial Assault library, right? So we'll see, lots of resculpts of possibly Han Solo. We already got one of Luke, and all the famous heroes. But I think what a lot of people don't realize is that Legion also is going to have you know, the whole concept of troops. So, you know, whereas Imperial Assault is you might see 2 or 3 troops mixed in with your team, your list, you know, which is comprised of some hero characters. Star Wars Legion will maybe have Luke Skywalker or Darth Vader, maybe another hero or commander. But for the most part, the players are going to be playing with generic armies. We're going to be seeing squads of Rebel Troopers, squads of Stormtroopers. You know, we won't see, you know, a team completely fielded of, you know, Han Solo, Chewbacca, Princess Leia, and Luke Skywalker. So to that point, I think the experience will be quite different. I think they've done a good job instead of setting it up to cater to different people. Now, granted, this is just my opinion. I do plan on collecting both games and playing both games. I feel that they both have a part in the market. But, you know, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on the matter. There's lots of chatter about it. You know, weigh in on it, and I'd love to hear what you guys think of that. But keep an eye on the channel here, as well as our website at www.enterthegamenexus.com. Leading up to 2018, we don't know when, but early 2018 is a launch frame for this game, but we definitely are excited. We're going to see lots of content rolling out, I'm sure, and we'll do our best to keep up with it and make sure we give you guys our opinions and what we think of the product. So, like I said, like and subscribe us, and hit us up at the website, and throw those comments down below, and we'll talk to you soon.
About to open fire. This guy's
Fantastic.
looking a little bit.
That gun is huge.
Looking a little bit.
You shall be purged from this world!
A formidable enemy is close. Strike it down with all the relish it deserves.